All around the world, this is what happens when workers fall out with their bosses. In the public sector, that boss is the government. But even when private sector workers strike, like railway staff, here in the UK, there are calls for the government to step in and at least take a seat at the negotiating table. And I can tell you, strikes run deep in Britain. They divide politicians, the public, colleagues and communities. I know a family that has barely spoken to each other since the miners' strike of 1984. So how effective are strikes? What can governments actually do about them? And is it always their responsibility to fix it? As we head into the summer, the so-called season of air traffic control strikes looms. There have already been strikes in Belgium and Greece, and here in the United Kingdom, the British government is currently facing an ongoing bin strike in the city of Birmingham, where politicians have called a public health risk. On top of that, teachers and NHS staff are due a pay rise, putting public sector relations firmly on the agenda. Let's get a sense of how it all works with our correspondent, Alex Barker.
From miners and railway workers to doctors and teachers, the right to down tools is an important part of British history and democracy. Workers are represented by trade unions who negotiate with their bosses, which might be the government in public sector disputes or private companies. But after mass strikes almost brought the nation to a standstill in 2022, last year the government set some boundaries. A new law means agency staff can now be used to cover striking workers, and essential services like healthcare and transport have to maintain a minimum service level and keep some staff working. But strikes can still have a massive impact. This is Birmingham, England's second city, where the bins haven't been collected for more than 6 weeks. The strikes began after the city council moved to cut key waste collection roles, slashing pay by up to £8,000 for some workers.
I wrote to the City Council raising my concerns very early on about the public health issue because, we cannot see vermin on the streets in the way that we've seen people writing to me, sending me pictures of cockroaches, of rats.
I am also immunosuppressant. I have had a transplant, so I have to be very careful going around it or going near it. And it causes problems, and it's just the obnoxious smell, of course, which comes through. Government, central government should step in. They should get rid of the commissioners that we have. And then speak to the local authorities, speak to the leadership and negotiate with the union nationally and locally to resolve this.
And there could be more strikes on the way.
What do we want? Fair pay! When do we want it? Now!
These were the scenes in 2022 when doctors, nurses and teachers were locked in a pay dispute with the then Conservative government. Now it's time for another pay rise. Independent pay review bodies have reportedly recommended increases of up to 4%. Which is more than the 2.8% the government has budgeted for.
Protect the NHS! We are the NHS!
That sort of discrepancy is a recipe for more picket lines. And as we head into summer, where travel industry strikes both in the UK and abroad are likely to cause chaos, it's clear the government needs a striking strategy.
I'm joined in the studio by Onay Kasab, National Lead Officer at the trade union Unite, Scarlett Mccgwire, former Labour Party advisor, and Madeline Grant, parliamentary sketchwriter at the Telegraph. Welcome to Westminster Watch. Let me ask you, have any of you ever been on strike?
I have, sort of.
Really?
Yes. When I was a teenager, my dad used to have me and my brother do jobs in the garden at home, and we once went on strike because he made us build a bonfire with loads of wood that had rusty nails in it, and we got horribly cut, and he was only giving us £5 for this job, so we were like, Dad, you're on your own, this is ridiculous.
Oh no, have you ever joined colleagues on the picket line? Presumably you would have done that in your role with Unite.
Yeah, I've been involved in a number of strikes. I first became a shop steward when I was 18. Years old and had my first strike when I was 19.
Is it actually a difficult decision to go on strike? Because you're foregoing money, aren't you, for a start?
Absolutely. Look, none of the members that we work with actually want to be out on strike. And it is very much a last resort. And I know we say that quite a lot, But what I would want to add to that is, although it's a last resort, it's not a desperate act. You know, in our view, it's when people decide, actually, I've had enough and I'm going to stand up and do something about it.
Scarlett, France, Spain, Belgium, even Denmark, they have lost more working days through strikes than Britain, if you look back over at least a decade, if not longer. Would you say we actually have pretty good industrial relations in this country?
Well, I think we did until a couple of years ago, when we had the teachers out on strike, the junior doctors out on strike, civil servants threatening to go. I mean, a lot of the public sector were because they just hadn't had any pay rises. And the real problem from your point of view is the lack of unionisation, actually. I mean, when I was president of the National Union of Journalists, we really, we had some power.
Talking about a peak time when the press, the whole system of producing newspapers was unionised. Was unionised.
And you could do something, yes.
Madeline, about 6.25 million of the workforce, I believe, about 20%, are in unions. Mm-hmm. Do you think it's necessary for them to be in unions?
I think it's their choice and a useful protection. I think there is obviously a balance to be struck here between the rights of workers in the public sector and the rights of the taxpayers and the service users, who in many cases are seeing their council taxes and other taxes increase all the time, while the quality of public service that they receive is getting worse. So it's always going to be a question of balancing and competing claims on the public purse.
But are there limits to what Madeline's talking about there in the public sector? So, we had the lengthy doctors' strike. Are there limits to what strikers should do and how long they should act, when often critical public services are at risk? In your own dispute at the moment in Birmingham, for example.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Take Birmingham as the example. I mean, we've got people who provide an essential public service. We've seen what happens when they don't do the job. We've had a public health emergency.
You've got bins
declared.
everywhere, rubbish bins everywhere, haven't you?
However, what the council want to do with these essential public service workers, with regard to the lowbies, is bring their pay down so they're only just above national minimum wage levels. Now, when you've got an employer that's doing what Birmingham Council is doing to its drivers, bringing its pay down from £40,000 to £32,000 a year, we make no apology for supporting those workers.
But how far do you go, Onay? Your cause may be just. Many would agree with you that actually cutting salaries that high is but public health has been quite a topic in the city of Birmingham, hasn't it? Talk of rats and all sorts of issues as the garbage collects. Where does the responsibility lie in the end for creating that problem?
Well, the responsibility here is clearly with Birmingham City Council. There's also some responsibility with the government as well. But I will take you back to the fact that these workers are not asking for a pay increase. All they're looking to do is defend their standard of living. The impact of what the council want to do will mean that these people will have problems paying rent, mortgages, shopping, etc. So as far as how far should they be able to go? As far as it takes in order to be able to defend their living standards. It's really that simple. None of our members live and work in the city. They're extremely proud of the city. They don't want to see it looking like it's looking at the moment. But I would ask, what choice have you got when you're told you face an £8,000
Scarlett, the government of the day get blamed pretty much for everything. But actually, the responsibility for the Birmingham strike and settling it sits very firmly with the council there. Is this a difficult place to be if you're a Labour MP at the moment, where intuitively you might like to support the strikers, but politically that's always not seen as a good thing, is it?
No, I think it's always difficult when Labour's in government. It's very, very easy to say to a Tory government, why aren't you paying the teachers properly? Why aren't you paying the doctors properly? And it is incredibly difficult to say. I mean, the problem with Birmingham is it's so long. I mean, it goes right back to an equal pay thing that they kept on fighting instead of agreeing, and so they owe an awful lot of money, and so it's a very complex one. I mean, and obviously the union does what the union has to do, and Birmingham City Council has to look. I mean, the union has to protect its members, absolutely rightly, but Birmingham City Council actually has to run Birmingham.
Should the government, though, step in and make it go away, do you think?
Well, I don't think they can. I mean, unless the government gives money. I mean, the government cannot force the bin workers to go back to work. So actually, the government will find it very difficult. I mean, with the teachers and the doctors' disputes, there was no question that the government said, we're not listening, we're not meeting, we're not doing anything. It's just made people very, very angry. But actually, I think for Birmingham, they've got to sort it out and they've got to work it out.
Madeline, 2023, the Conservative government then brought in effectively rules that drew the line in the public interest about when people could strike and who they could strike, sort of a minimum service level agreement, so things would get done. The Labour government are basically going to get rid of that minimum service levels agreement, and yet surely Birmingham is an example where they should be able to say, enough, public health is at stake, you've got to get back to work.
Well, I think the situation in Birmingham is, I mean, I have so much sympathy for what Onay was talking about. You can't dock people's pay by $8,000 a year, people with families. This is just a nightmare situation. And a lot of this dates back to the council's own mismanagement. But I do think there are arguments in certain cases. I mean, we already have a military that can't really go on strike if it wanted to.
And the police force.
Exactly. So I think there are some cases. But in this particular example, this is not like, in my opinion, the train drivers who ask for extremely generous terms and were given them by the Louise Haigh, the former Transport Secretary. I mean, it's shocking. And the people who are going to have to pay for this inevitably are the citizens of Birmingham who currently have no service at all, but their council taxes keep going up.
A final word on Birmingham before we go on to other things, Onay. How do you really judge that the public are with you? How are the public in Birmingham? Are they not getting absolutely fed up that they're not seeing their bin men?
The way I judge it is when I walk around in Birmingham, not so much about what's in social media or in the normal media, but when I walk around in Birmingham and I'm talking to people and people coming and seeing our picket lines, I'm getting a very friendly response from people in Birmingham because I think they realise exactly what you said. This is not about asking for more money. Can I just come back to a point about the government's responsibility as well? Let's not forget that Birmingham has a debt of around over £3 billion. It's paying some 250 million in interest on its loans every year. 90% of that goes to the Treasury. The interest rate on that is well above standard levels. So actually, there is something the government can do tomorrow. It can step in, restructure that loan, and by doing that, it will help the situation in Birmingham. This dispute could be over tomorrow.
Do you, as a trade union, a leading figure in the trade union movement that backs and funds the Labour Party, do you expect more from a Labour Party? Is your expectation higher, as Scarlett was saying, because it's Labour in government, locally or nationally, you expect more from them than you ever would from the Tories?
I think an awful lot of our members have expected more from the Labour Party. And again, sorry to keep going on about Birmingham, but it's the example. You know, we've had Labour politicians in government telling our members to just accept the proposals and get back to work, despite the fact that there was no proposal on the table. I don't see how any politician, whatever their political colours, could be supporting a position whereby working people face an £8,000 a year pay cut. So let's not forget, and I don't want to have too much of a go at MPs, but they've had a pay increase, they get subsidised lunches, they tell councillors who in Birmingham have had a 5.7% increase in their allowances to enforce an £8,000 pay cut to public service workers.
Scarlett, it's quite interesting. Compared to many European countries, there's no legal right to strike in this country at all, is there? Do you think that actually there should be more protections and more rights granted for people to withhold their labour? Or do you think we've got it about right in this country?
I think we've got it about right. I mean, I think that, as Onay says, it's a very difficult decision to go out on strike, and it should be. And it should not be the stereotype of down tools whenever you feel like it. And it really isn't. And it should be something that people try very, very hard to negotiate first. I mean, I remember Onay's boss, the head of Unite, talking about a dispute at Felixstowe, and the interviewer said to her, "Oh, but that's all you do is go out on strike," and she said, "I've negotiated 76 deals. That's what I do. I negotiate deals. I try not to negotiate strike. Striking is when everything has fallen when you can't do anything else. That's what it has to be a last resort.
But they're also easy to negotiate, aren't they, Madeline? If you come to government like the Labour Party did, and they dished out the money to just about anyone who was on strike, didn't they? Is that something the government are going to rue as we go into the summer and a potential summer of discontent, where we understand the public pay recommendations are going to be higher than the government want them to be? Do you think we're in for rocky times?
I think we very much are. It's already been interesting to see what happened to Louise Haigh, who I mentioned before, the Transport Secretary, who gave this, I think, pretty generous... Former Transport Secretary. She was basically defenestrated, but it looks as if for a criminal conviction that she had in the past. But I think the manner of it coming to the fore was quite suspicious. It suggested that potentially there were people in Labour who were gunning for her to be gone as well. And she was known to be, to have many colleagues who took umbrage at the way that she basically agreed this deal without getting the sign-off from Number 10. So I think this is something that they are aware of, and they're basically already worried that there's going to be a kind of cascading effect where other industries look at what happened in transport and say, we deserve this. What about us? So I think, and also, frankly, the impact of Rachel Reeves's budget last year has been so damaging to the economy that I suspect they probably thought they'd have a bit more money to throw around than they currently do.
It's interesting, Onay. Rachel Reeves has imposed her own financial rules about what she will borrow and what she won't borrow. She can only afford pay rises of 2.8% for the public sector. Teachers are not going to be happy about that. Nurses definitely not happy about that. Do you sense that you may reach sooner rather than later that point where strikes do start to plague this government between summer and rolling into the autumn? Because it's got to be important pay, hasn't it?
Yeah, and we've been very clear about that. And again, because of what happened or what is happening in Birmingham, that this could happen in local authorities across the country, in the NHS, across local government. And yes, I can see a position whereby we are defending those members and supporting those members in taking action.
Just on that point though, Scarlett, what are the do's and don'ts when it comes for governments looking at strikes?
I mean, I think it's very, very difficult. And there's no question that what you have to do, which is what the shadow cabinet was saying all the time during the teachers' strikes and the health strikes, is you've got to get round the table, you've got to explain, you've got to try and work out, is there a way round? And teachers, for instance, will know, I mean, the higher they get, the less the schools will have to budget. I mean, that like it or not, I mean, Rachel has completely fenced herself in as to what can happen, and what one is looking for is some sort of creativity, and that's got to sort of start. But actually, teachers on strike, nurses on strike, junior doctors on strike are a disaster for the economy.
Well, they're a disaster for the economy, but actually, under these circumstances, Madeline, Labour would have no one else to blame for this strike except the doctors and the nurses, and they'll probably get the blame, won't they, Labour? It's going to be politically damaging.
The other difficulty for Labour is that although the trade unions don't have the kind of influence that they had in British, certainly in industrial life compared to, say, the 70s, 60s, they still wield an enormous amount of power within the Labour Party. It's very hard for MPs, for example, to survive as MPs if they don't have the goodwill of various of the unions when they're coming for their reselection. So it actually puts them in a very difficult position politically. I think Scarlett made a very good point about how hemmed in they are and how sort of the whole system is so kind of ossified. There's fewer options available to them.
But Labour have drawn the net around themselves very tightly, haven't they?
Yeah, and also, like, we're broke. Our economy is in such a terrible, terrible state, and it's getting worse.
Onay, when it comes to negotiating, on a national scale, perhaps not using Birmingham as an example in this case, the government are almost certainly going to say to people, it's in the national interest that you only take 2.8% pay rise. Tell us candidly, tell us honestly, does a union representative in those talks ever really bear in mind the national interest, or are they entirely focused, and some would say reasonably, on their members' interest?
I think it's a false division. The reality is that as far as pay is concerned, if you have decent, well-paid workers, they go out, they spend in the economy, and that's good for the local economy. Unlike the very wealthy, they don't take their money out of the country in offshore tax havens, etc. So it actually makes good economic sense to pay people properly. When we go into negotiations, we take everything into account. And yes, we do take into account what the situation of that company or that employer may well be. We do our research beforehand. But I think the national interest is no different to the interest of working people. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said about using some imagination going forward, and the discussion we've had about being hemmed in. What we've said as a trade union is that yes, we have to find the money, but the money exists in parts of the economy. That's why we talk about a 1% wealth tax for the richest 1% in this country, brings in an extra 26 billion. If you did it in one go, that would be a massive boost. It would fill the black hole we keep hearing about, and it could help the NHS, could help local government.
We won't get into the economics of that, Scarlett, but some countries like France and Spain, they've had an attempt to ban politically motivated strikes. I think there's all sorts of questions to be raised about that. Can you ever see a Labour government trying to take on politically motivated strikes, even to the point that they might ban them?
No, because in this country, certainly under a Labour government, they aren't politically motivated. I mean, they're not trying to bring down a government. What they're trying to do, and basically it's public sector, is they're actually just fighting for their members. So everybody knows. I mean, I've done negotiations. It's a sort of game, right? Is that you go in, you know. You spend the first hour either saying something or listening to something, and you all know what's going to go there. And then you get down to the nitty gritty and you start seeing.
Do you ever solve anything in negotiations, or is it all kind of worked out in advance?
No, you can throw an interesting idea that they can go and think about. Okay. I haven't done, this is the negotiation king, I've just done a few, but there is no question that you can work it out, you can see how you can go. And I do think that if there is reasonable goodwill, that one can say, look, we haven't got the money to do more than 2.8. But why don't we do it like this?
I'll bring this to a close. Madeline, you sit on the centre right of the political debate today, I suspect. Would you would you place a very high value on strikes? Do you think they are an essential part of our democracy, notwithstanding some of the reservations we've been talking about them put into practice?
Yeah, I think it's a matter of human work. It's a matter of a workforce having the right to withdraw its labour. I'm not some kind of autocrat. I think people have the right to do that, but then someone also has to speak for the taxpayers who ultimately generate the wealth that pays for absolutely everything else. Yeah. And also who often don't have such good pensions.
The victims of the strikes, and I choose that word perhaps pejoratively, the public, they really don't have a voice in this, do they? Shouldn't that trouble strikers, though?
Yeah, look, of course it does. And an awful lot of strikes that we're involved in, we campaign together with the public. We often go door knocking. We're often in communities explaining why our people are out on strike. And when we do that, when the facts are explained, we do get an awful lot of support.
Nick, when the railway workers went on strike, what was incredible was the public support for them, even though it meant they couldn't travel and they couldn't do this. And the same with the nurses and the ambulance drivers. Actually, I think public support given or not given is incredibly important.
Who knows, maybe that's because compared to many of our European nations, we actually have some of the fewer number of days lost through strikes. Anyway, I'm sure we'll be coming back to this. Onay Kasab, Scarlett Mccgwire, Madeline, thanks very much for joining us here on the sofa of Westminster Watch, and thanks again to all my guests for joining me, and don't forget to connect with us on X. We're at Westminster TRT. But for now, from me and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.